Hey everyone, today I am going to be speaking with Ugo Arinzeh, who is with Onyx Property Team in London, and she's going to talk to us about the process of purchasing a home in the UK. Ugo, what can you tell us about you, a little bit about yourself, and introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Karen, for having me. I'm excited to talk to you and your audience. My name is Ugo Arinzeh. I am the founder of Onyx Property Team, part of Keller Williams here in the UK. I have been living in London for 11 years now. I grew up in New Jersey, so Jersey girl, proud of it. Yeah, and really enjoy working in the property market here in London. It is very different than the US. One of the things I'll start off with is that agents are not licensed here. So that always gets people quite surprised, is that we are not licensed. And really the dominant market is the estate agents who work for sellers. So it does mean that under the normal process, most buyers are not working with agents. However, I do specialize in working with buyers. So, but the norm is people are pretty much left on their own to try to navigate the market with estate agents.
So then if I were to come over and be looking to buy, say, a flat in London, would I just be looking at websites and going from one to another and contacting different agents? And
Yeah. That's
yes.
exactly right. So the process as it works, or is the norm, is that you as a buyer would be searching key portals where there are listings. You'd be putting in your criteria, and say a dozen properties come up for your search for £1 million in Notting Hill. Those listings can be on with several different agents, and we actually do multiple agency. We can do multiple agency. So you could actually potentially see the same property listed with different agents, which is also very confusing for buyers. And what it means then is, as you try to find out more details, arrange viewings, you're working and dealing with all these different agents who really, again, are representing the seller and really are not really looking after you as the buyer. So in terms of helping guide you, talking about your needs, your search criteria, no, it's really them trying to find a buyer for their sales listing. So you kind of have to navigate all that yourself. You're obviously going to be having to ask the right questions, trying to understand the market. So we have so many different nuances in terms of our ownership structure, issues on the state of the property, that whole process. And then when it comes to negotiating, having to really negotiate with an agent who works for the seller. So those are some of the many problems that I think that unfairly position buyers in this market, which is why, you know, having come over from America, I saw a real opportunity to work as an agent, as a buying specialist, and really looking after buyers and holding their hand, from helping them figure out areas and neighborhoods and their criteria, helping them understand how realistic that is relative to the property market, to organizing viewings and trying to make that process as efficient as possible, ultimately to find them the right property, and then negotiating hard for our buyers. But it does mean that, again, in America, where sellers are typically paying 6%, 5 to 6% or 5 to 7% for sales commission, which is split between the sales agent and the buying agent. Here, sellers pay a lot less. So they're paying kind of in the 1.5 to 3% range. So it does mean that when my buyers hire me, they will be paying my fee because we're not able to get it from a sales agent. But I'm very confident in the service we deliver, and the Google reviews, and the happy clients we work with. So there is definitely a need for that buyer representation here.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So the listing agent would get that 1.5 to 3% of the sales price, but they
Right.
don't split it with a buyer's agent because they don't typically,
Really exist
yeah.
typically.
So that you'd be a good person to know for anybody coming into the London area to be able to help them navigate, because it is confusing. And I'm from the UK, and it's a whole.
Yeah, it blew my mind coming over here. It really is mind blowing that the buyer's not being represented, and therefore, yeah, I felt there was real opportunity to service them. I've got a very active YouTube channel where people are finding me, and it's often Americans looking to buy or have questions, and just
Yeah.
really navigating, understanding. As I said, we have, a concept called stamp duty, which is a tax on purchase. We have different ownership structures. You have to understand a leasehold versus freehold. So there's so many nuances that are different. And I can't even imagine if you as a buyer are trying to figure that out, let alone, tax implications, moving money, all those things, surveys and valuations and appraisals, that you're kind of left on your own to try to navigate. So
yeah, and I guess, just like here, just like in any profession, if you have, you have good agents, you have not so good agents. So if you are looking on the internet and you find a property you like and it's represented by not so good agent, then you're not getting all that information, all those things that you were just talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a situation recently where they misrepresented the storage units that would come with the property, right? And so we picked that up when we started questioning about what was demised with the property and not, but that's not something that a buyer would kind of know right off the bat. And we were able to identify that and certainly, use it from a negotiating perspective. So yeah.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Well, you touched on a couple of things then that I did have questions, because again, I was over there just recently and looking at properties potentially to purchase ourselves down the line. There were some things that came up and I said, I remember these terms from when I was a kid, from when my parents bought houses, but I really don't understand them. And I thought, well, if I don't understand them, then, Americans are not going to understand them. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to go through a couple of questions here I had. So the fees associated with a purchase, like over here, as some states don't have it, but in New Jersey, we have attorneys representing buyers and sellers. So, we have attorneys, title searches, mortgage fees and applications and all of that. What would typically, that would usually come to around 2.5% of the purchase price on it, on average. So in the UK, if you were buying, say, $1 million property, what sort of costs would you find that would be associated with that?
Well, the biggest cost is we have what we call stamp duty, which is a tax on purchase. So it's the same as having a sales tax. If you, buy a screwdriver at Home Depot and go up to the till and pay a tax on top of the purchase price. We have that. Stamp duty is significant in the UK. It does range and it is tiered. So it's not, I can't really give you a straightforward number because, for the first 500,000, it's at 1%, then it kind of creeps up. The other dynamic is that it will have surcharges based on if you're buying a second home or if you are an overseas buyer. So it is significant. And so just back of the envelope, £1 million property could start if you were a first-time buyer. I believe the number is about 43,000, so that's roughly 4.3%. But if you are a second homeowner anywhere in the world, it kind of jumps up to 73,000. So we're talking about significant numbers that you again need to be budgeting. So that's stamp duty, and then beyond that, then obviously you've got solicitors' fees and what have you. Not so significant. That's a few £1,000s all in. Obviously, if you're depending on your mortgage situation, you might be paying for that mortgage to be secured for you. And then again, if you were working with me, then that would be an additional expense but a buyer would need to budget.
Okay. Wow, interesting. I did not know about the stamp duty, so that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Now, I will say stamp duty does replace your relatively high property taxes in New Jersey. So we do not have the same significant level of property taxes. We have something called council tax,
That was
which
my next
does
question.
cover, yeah, so council tax covers for the services of the borough, the council, and London has 32 boroughs. But it is, you know, on a 500,000 pound property, you might be paying 2,000 a month or 2,000 per annum. So it is significantly less. So yeah, so stamp duty is a hit front end, but the ongoing annual property taxes are significantly less. And if you're buying it as an investment property, a buy to let, as we call it, you can transfer the responsibility of council tax onto your tenants. So it's paid by who's utilizing the property. So in that regard, you could buy property, pay the stamp duty. If you've got tenants in there, they are then responsible for the council tax.
Interesting. Okay. And then something else that came up as well was ground rent, and then the leasehold, freehold. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, and obviously this is an old country, and it's kind of, I think, the genesis of, you know, feudalistic ownership society. So the basic concept is that even though you own a flat or an apartment, you may not own the underlying ground, and that is owned by a freeholder. So there's a concept where, as a flat, any place where it's more than one unit, right? So if it's a multiple unit dwelling, you might be a leaseholder, and then there is a separate and distinct freeholder. In that situation, you have then service charges, which are for the ongoing upkeep of the space, similar to homeowners association dues, HOA dues. However, and so that is, you know, if a building has amenities, if it's got a porter, concierge, a swimming pool, whatever, obviously the higher and the more luxury qualities it has or amenities, the higher you would expect to pay in those service charges. But they are to cover the expense of managing the building. However, in addition, you could be paying ground rent, which is just purely for the right to own your property in essence, and that is significantly less than service charges. However, it's still an expense. It could be a few £100 or £600 a year, £1,000 a year, but it can rise over time as well. So it's not a fixed rate. It could be something that is absolutely increasing over time, just not on an annual basis. So that is the distinction between a leasehold and a freehold. So if you own a single family home, you're obviously the freeholder, no issue. You're just going to be paying the costs associated with owning that property, the building insurance, what have you. When you're a leaseholder, that is obviously split amongst all the leaseholders, and you would be allocated your pro rata share in the form of a component of the service charge. And then there's a third structure where under a multiple dwelling ownership, you could be part of the freehold ownership. And in that situation, we call it a share of freehold. So you have a lease, which is still distinct to your unit, but you're now part of the ownership of the freehold. And in that situation, you wouldn't be paying a ground rent. You just merely would be paying the service charges associated with the communal upkeep of the building. So there are a couple of different structures.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. And then I think I read an article about this, and I think I've seen it over here as well, and that they're sort of not penalizing, but overseas buyers that are looking to purchase vacation homes, second homes in the UK, especially in resort towns or things like that, cottages or in little villages. They're being bought up by overseas buyers, and they are outpricing the locals. So I think I read an article about they are going to be sort of taxed heavier for this, or there's some kind of penalty for doing that. So can you touch on that?
Yeah, that's what I had mentioned relative to the stamp duty. So there are surcharges depending on your situation. So you might have so starting with the first level would be a first time buyer. Okay, so you've got this stamp duty calculation based on
Right.
that scenario. But say if you own a second home anywhere in the world, then they kind of treat it now as you're now an investor. So there's a surcharge associated with on top of the tier you would have been had you been just a first time buyer. Then there's an additional surcharge if you are an international buyer. So it's seemingly trying to make it a bit more punitive to that international buyer to balance it out relative to what a domestic first time buyer might pay.
Ah, got it. Got it. Okay. And is that something that you've seen happen more recently, or has that always been the case?
Well, let's just say the UK government is quite reliant on stamp duty, and London contributes more than its fair share. And obviously, London is a city that's highly appealing to international buyers. So, and international buyers don't vote. So, yes, has been something that the government has reached back time and time again and increase those stamp duty calculations and surcharges and amendments to it. I think it started off at 1% in the early 1980s or 90s or something, and here we are at the highest level being 17% if you own in an offshore vehicle. And your property is over 10 million, right? So you're going to be hit with the highest level of stamp duty. So it is definitely something that has evolved and really increased over the years.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. The other thing, so if you are, let's just say a US buyer buying with US dollars and you're coming over and you need to convert it into British pounds to purchase, let's say you're purchasing with cash. Is there a way to do that without paying all the conversion fees and all of that? Is there a company that handles that?
Yeah, look, and that's part of the advice we can give our clients. And so, yes, obviously the banks will have the highest exchange rate costs and penalties to people moving money. And so there are other entities that will do it at a more competitive rate. And we are happy to make those introductions. But overall speaking, for example, HSBC is probably the one international bank that you will find that has a retail presence in both the US and the UK. And so beyond just the exchange rate factor is sometimes getting the mortgage. So that's a big issue for a lot of my clients. And opening and part of opening or getting a mortgage application, you need a UK bank account. And so that can be a challenge as well. So one of the things that my American buyers have been able to do is work with HSBC, and we're trying to find other institutions that will do that to help facilitate opening those bank accounts here in the UK, even though you're resident someplace else. But on the exchange rate factor, yes, there are definitely institutions. Obviously, when Brexit first announced, and for several years, the pound dropped dramatically, and so we saw the dollar benefiting significantly. That is regressing back to the norm now in terms of the dollar, value relative to the pound. But obviously, that changes by interest rates and economic scenarios.
Yeah, yeah. Do you find, is it easy for sort of a US citizen to get a mortgage in the UK?
Yeah, the good thing is there are no restrictions in terms of the UK government in terms of prohibitions or restrictions on international ownership, which is why you see 40% of prime central London is owned by foreigners. US is one of the most difficult, I have to say, and it's more driven by the US government's restrictions or requirements on compliance. And so a lot of lenders don't particularly want to lend to U.S. residents. However, again, we have found those banks, whether they're private banks or other institutions that will. And again, that's part of the service we offer. Is usually after the first conversation with me, the next conversation I try to have is connecting them to mortgage advisors that specialize in working with international buyers to help facilitate and finding those banks and institutions that will lend to Americans and others.
Well, that's good to know. You know what, again, I just assumed that being in the US, you wouldn't be able to, unless you're based there and you're earning a salary and paying taxes. So that's good to know.
Now we work with quite a few, and again, if hopefully if you can check out my YouTube channel or check out my website, we act for many American clients, and often they're buying as a buy to let, or people who had a goal or dream of owning a property abroad, and we can help them buy that, and there's no restriction, and they can use the property as and when, or we can rent it out and manage it for them, earning income for them and keeping it either here or in the US.
Oh, so you can manage properties too?
Oh yeah, that's part of our full service. So
Nice.
a lot of our clients are buying as buy to lets or rental properties, as I said. So we will help them find the property. In one case, we bought for a California couple and just really had a great result for that. Bought for them, needed a bit of renovating, just improvement, painting, fixing up. We've got referral partners and contractors we can refer them to, and we kind of project managed that for them, looked after that, fixed it up, rented it out. Actually, no, they came to use the flat at Christmas, so they wanted to come over. So they bought sight unseen, completely based on the videos and recommendations in my work, and bought it. Were able to come at Christmas, utilized it, and gave it back. And then we rented it out. And we've got great tenants in there for them, and we looked after that entire process for them.
That's great. That's great to know you can do all that. Perfect. And then what about, I guess, finally, sort of, I'm thinking that it's the same in London as it is, anywhere around the world, supply and demand. Are you finding this? I mean, you're in central London, right? Or
Correct. So I focus on central London. We haven't had the same dynamics in that, well, we had Brexit for many years. And so that overhang, literally from that June 2016 vote, really kind of tanked the market. And that was the peak of the London property market, was around 2016, 2015. And we had that Brexit overhang for many years. And with that instability and with that uncertainty, and given how reliant the London property market is on international buyers, property prices came down, 5 to 20% in some cases. It has started to creep back up, and then we got COVID. And so COVID then, really the areas that benefited were, we saw this flight to green space, this race for space, as we say. So people were now more focused on getting the balconies, getting the private gardens, getting the outdoor space, having the home with the garden, or, backyard, as we say. And so with that, London was not the beneficiary, right? So it really took a further hit. Now, London didn't fall off the cliff. It corrected, but as you know, real estate is cyclical. But it's been a long, flattened cycle coming into 2020, and yet we're starting to see a rebound. So whereas the rest of the UK really has benefited from, COVID and people wanting to own and have their own space, or recognizing that they no longer have to commute into the city. So now they can afford to live further out, and affordability, obviously, those areas have benefited more. We are anticipating that London is finally going to start rebounding this year, into the 2 to 5% price appreciation, but transaction volume overall is down. So it's been a weird dynamic, is that it's a buyer's market right now, but a lot of sellers don't have to sell in London. So sometimes if they're not achieving the price that they want, they will choose not to put it on the market. So we've got a weird dynamic, is that volume is down, but it is a buyer's market. So we don't have the same level of stock. but we also don't have the same level of buyer demand that we've typically seen in the past.
Okay, interesting. I guess, yeah, the same as New York City. You know, when COVID first hit, a lot of people in the city were heading out to the suburbs and into
That's
New
right.
Jersey or up to Westchester.
That's right.
And but yeah, you know, that's sort of slowed down now. And
correct. And I think now that the world's opening back up again, what makes cities appealing is the arts, the culture, the food, all that stuff. Whereas if you don't have that in COVID, you have to live at home, then being in a very small flat is not very appealing. But the appeal of London is the lifestyle of London. So that's now coming back, and we're seeing that. Probably the other thing I should mention that we talked a little bit about mortgages and interest rates is an interesting dynamic is our mortgage structures are a bit different in that we don't have like 30-year fixed mortgages. So our fixed rate periods are a lot shorter. So 2 to 5% is more the norm. And our amortization might be, significantly less. So it won't be to 30 years, maybe it's 25, but maybe it's even less. And sometimes there's age caps on the amortization up to age 65. So there's, again, a lot of different dynamics that people have to factor. I have a background as a real estate investment banker. So I feel like that's something else I really bring to clients is helping them understand the economics and mapping out the finances of this investment, which is pretty significant.
And then one thing I did hear, and whether this is true or not, because over here with mortgages, there's a whole slew of different programs, FHA, you can do 3% down, you can do 3% conventional. And I mean, there's a USDA mortgage where you can put 0% down, which came from the old farmers and more rural areas. So in the UK, is it true that it's a minimum of 20% down for a mortgage?
I would be expecting that, certainly on a buy to let. First time buyers and owner occupiers can probably get away with maybe 5 to 10% at the most aggressive, but certainly a buy to let that investor should be expecting to have 20 to 25% mortgage equity down payment.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a lot of information, a lot of good information. So I'm going to be putting this out, and obviously we'll put your information with it. And if anybody wants to contact you, I know that I've been getting your emails for years and your Facebook. You do put out a lot of great information on not just on properties, but the culture and things to see and do in London. The lifestyle. So if anybody's interested in finding more out about London and the lifestyle, then definitely connect with Ugo, and she'll be able to help you with any questions.
Thank you, Karen. And we also help people relocating. So sometimes obviously buying is a huge investment. So if we work with international, relocations, we've got quite a few people coming over with, multinationals, whether it's Amazon out of the West Coast or out of the DC area. And so we will help people find rental properties as well. And so, but thank you. And I love living here. I say the weather is a disaster, but besides that, it makes up for itself in a lot of different ways. And if I can be of any help for showing off the culture and the lifestyle and giving people a sense of this incredible city, then that's what I try to put out content on. So thank you.
Wow. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And
Pleasure.
hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, take care.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.